month after Orr met with Simpson, Orr met for a second time with Christopher Steele over breakfast at 8 a.m. at the Capitol Hilton Hotel in Washington, D.C. The date was September 23rd. The ex-British spy had been exceedingly busy. Days earlier, on September 19th, he had flown to Rome to deliver even more memos in his dossier to his FBI handler, Special Agent Michael Gaeta. Gaeta, in return, had forwarded them to the Bureau in Washington. During one meeting with Gaeta, attended by 4 agents flown in from Washington, in either September or October, Steele was offered a jaw-dropping $50,000 bonus if only he could verify with solid corroboration the information in his dossier that Trump was colluding with Russia to influence the election. That presented an insurmountable dilemma. The ex-spy could not possibly verify something that had never occurred. His information was derived from anonymous sources, assuming they even existed, and was based on multiple hearsays. In the end, Steele did not collect the bonus. But the offer of $50,000 by the FBI shows how desperate the Bureau was to verify the unverifiable and to damage Trump's candidacy in the face of the fast-approaching presidential election. That failure to verify, however, did not seem to discourage either the FBI or Steele in the least. With every new dossier memo accusing Trump of collusion, Steele made doubly sure that they were passed on to both the FBI and Orr at the DOJ. By late September, there was a total of 11 such memos. As before, Orr promptly conveyed the latest Steele memos to FBI agent Joe Pientka, who was now assigned as Orr's handler. Pientka then dispatched the material to his bureau partner Peter Strzok, who was overseeing the Trump-Russia investigation. During the September 23rd visit to the nation's capital, Steele met with someone else in the U.S. government, Jonathan Weiner, a State Department official. When that surreptitious meeting was later exposed in the media, Weiner penned a bizarre and nauseatingly self-aggrandizing op-ed in the Washington Post. He seemed to brag about his role as a facilitator of anti-Trump material. He described how it had worked. Like a 4-person Olympic relay team, Steele had dropped a digest of the dossier gossip off to Weiner, who had handed it off to Nuland, who had then passed the baton on to Secretary of State John Kerry, who had apparently completed the final leg by racing it over the finish line to the FBI. Of course, the Bureau already had it, courtesy of Simpson, Orr, and Gaeta. But Weiner took it a step further. He also met with longtime Hillary Clinton friend and confidant Sidney Blumenthal, who had his hands on what became known as the second dossier. That equally dubious document peddled many of the same sordid stories about Trump's purported collusion with Russia. It had been created, according to Weiner, by Clinton ally Cody Shearer. At that point, a reverse relay was enacted as the information in the second dossier made its way to the FBI. Shearer to Blumenthal, to Weiner, to Steele. It is quite likely that some of Shearer's accusations against Trump were transcribed into the last few Steele memos, which were then passed on to the FBI. The comical stupidity of this scenario would make the fictional detective Sam Spade blush. It was inane. And so was the second treatment of collusion, which echoed some of the identical fantastic allegations as the original Steele-Simpson version, equally bereft of evidence or corroboration. It constituted a collection of rumors, innuendo, and wild conjecture. Special emphasis was placed on the notion that Trump had magically engineered the hacking of Democrats' email accounts, including Blumenthal's. Speculation supplanted facts. None of the accusations against Trump was authentic. This invites the question, just who is Cody Shearer? Mark Hemingway, a senior writer at the Weekly Standard, has followed the activities of Shearer and offered this assessment. It's worth noting that Shearer is one of the most disreputable characters in Washington and has been frequently connected to the most scandalous acts of the Clintons' political careers. If Steele passed on information and/or allegations from Shearer to the FBI, and that information was acted on, it raises serious concerns about the impartiality and judgment of Steele and the FBI. Steele did give Shearer's second dossier to the FBI. Hemingway was also unsparing in his appraisal of Blumenthal, writing that Blumenthal is a known liar and rumormonger so disreputable that the Obama White House put their foot down and nixed her, Clinton's attempt to hire Blumenthal at the State Department. Blumenthal and Shearer were not the only Clinton allies circulating the collusion canard. Perkins Coie lawyers for the DNC and Clinton campaign, who had hired Simpson to dig up dirt on Trump, were now passing information along to the FBI. Michael Sussman, a partner at the firm, met with FBI General Counsel James Baker on September 19th, the first of several meetings. According to Baker's testimony, he received a stack of papers and an electronic disk from Sussman that constituted purported evidence of secret communications between Trump and Russians involving Alfa Bank in Moscow. Baker delivered the materials to Comey, McCabe, and Strzok. Like many of Steele's other accusations, that one was subsequently proven to be false, but not before it had been fed to the media, including the New York Times and Slate, which published stories. The media publicized the dossier. The scheme hatched by Simpson and Steele to distribute their phony dossier to the FBI and Justice Department was only the first part of their overarching strategy to damage Trump and buttress the candidacy of his opponent. To have an impact on the election, the document would need to be fed to the ravenous anti-Trump media in advance of the election. Simpson, a former reporter, orchestrated the ensuing meetings with numerous journalists he knew. Steele, as an ex-intelligence agent, attended many of them to add the imprimatur of legitimacy to the supposed intelligence they were selling. The journalists, predisposed to run with negative stories on Trump, were informed that government law enforcement was already in possession of the same document, giving the reporters an excuse to author articles on the accusations contained therein, even though none of them had been verified as true. That crafty calculus paid off as stories began to emerge alleging that Trump was colluding with Russia to win the presidency. Steele met with Michael Isikoff of Yahoo News, who published an article on September 23, 2016, repeating an allegation that Carter Page had opened up private communications with senior Russian officials and discussed the lifting of economic sanctions. The story stated that the Trump foreign policy advisor had met with two Russians who were mentioned in Steele's memos and connected Page to suspected efforts by Moscow to influence the presidential election. The Clinton campaign called it a bombshell report and sought widespread distribution. The campaign published a thumping screed on Trump-Russian collusion while concealing from everyone that it had secretly funded the fabrications. Blasting it out to millions of voters, the campaign accused her rival of an action that could directly enrich both Trump and Page while undermining American interests. Without using the word treason, Clinton all but accused Trump of being a traitor. It was not true, of course. That did not stop the FBI and DOJ from using Isikoff's story to obtain a warrant to wiretap Page, even though the reporter's source was the same source, Steele, that was cited for the bulk of the warrant application. The judges were never informed of that and were led to believe that there were separate sources to justify the wiretap. All this will be discussed in the next chapter. The Isikoff story was just the opening salvo in an all-out assault against Trump by the corrupt triumvirate of Simpson, Steele, and the media. The two men behind the imaginary dossier also briefed CNN, Mother Jones, BuzzFeed News, ABC News, the New York Times, the Washington Post, the New Yorker, Politico, and other news organizations that saw huge traffic numbers in allegations about a presidential nominee from extremely trustworthy high-level sources. Simpson and Steele weren't that, which was why it was so important to be able to say the FBI was investigating the matter. No credible journalist would report on the dossier as truth. What was needed was respected journalists who would write a story saying that respectable people were talking about the dossier. One of the more damaging stories on Trump was published by David Korn of Mother Jones, who had been given a copy of Steele's dossier. Korn's October 31, 2016 article gained widespread attention just 1 week before Americans went to the polls to cast their ballots. He asked, "Does this mean that the FBI is investigating whether Russian intelligence has attempted to develop a secret relationship with Trump or cultivate him as an asset?" Korn identified his source as a former senior intelligence officer for a Western country who specialized in Russian counterintelligence. That, of course, was Steele. Korn described him as a credible source with a proven record of providing reliable, sensitive, and important information to the U.S. government. Korn's story was the basis of the fever dream that would possess anti-Trump forces for more than 2 years. It covered rumors instead of substance. It portrayed unreliable people as models of morality. It included hedges about whether or not the whole thing was true, and it hinted that where there was smoke, there must be fire. Korn quoted directly from Steele's dossier that portrayed Trump as a Russian asset who was being controlled through blackmail and also associated him with the hacking of the DNC and the Clinton campaign email server. The FBI was in shock and horror at what had been uncovered, according to Korn. There was concern that the election was being undermined and delegitimized. Any American who read the story and believed it would surely cast his or her vote for someone other than Trump. It was a devastating indictment. Never mind that it was untrue. Near the end of the article, almost as an afterthought, Korn penned a rather feeble disclaimer. There's no way to tell whether the FBI has confirmed or debunked any of the allegations contained in the former spy's memos. Thus, after maligning Trump as a probable traitor with depraved intent, Korn belatedly inserted the caveat that it might all be a lie. It was the quintessential journalistic hit job. Korn didn't stop there. He also provided a copy of Steele's dossier to the FBI's General Counsel James Baker, who dutifully distributed it to the agents and officials investigating Trump-Russia collusion. The extent to which the two men discussed the document and the FBI's investigation is not fully known because Baker, under criminal investigation by the DOJ for potential violation of FBI regulations, was directed by his lawyer not to answer such questions. However, by the time they met, the Bureau was receiving multiple copies of every successive memo invented by the former British spy. The distribution chain was the definition of overkill, but Simpson and Steele were taking no chances. They planned to inundate the FBI, the DOJ, and the media with the spurious accusations that Trump was in bed with Putin to manipulate the presidential election results. Korn and Isikoff, it should be noted, subsequently teamed up to co-author a book, Russian Roulette, the inside story of Putin's war on America and the election of Donald Trump, that was inspired by their initial reporting. They described it as the story of political skullduggery unprecedented in American history, weaving together a circumstantial argument that implied that Trump and/or his campaign was involved in Russian efforts to throw the election his way. Korn and Isikoff seemed to take credit for the collusion scandal that, in the end, proved unfounded and inauthentic. No matter. The book became a #1 New York Times bestseller. The Times, which was itself wholly committed to the collusion delusion, lauded it as the most thorough and riveting account so far. Ironically, Isikoff's previous bestseller with Korn, Hubris, the inside story of spin, scandal, and the selling of the Iraq War, had exposed the faulty and fraudulent intelligence leading to the Iraq War. If only they'd brought the same skepticism to this project. 9 months after Russian Roulette was published, Isikoff told an interviewer that Steele was clearly onto something. But then, in a cathartic moment, he grudgingly admitted that when you actually get into the details of the Steele dossier, the specific allegations, we have not seen the evidence to support them, and, in fact, there's good grounds to think that some of the more sensational allegations will never be proven and are likely false. His remarks made headlines. So in a follow-up tweet, he performed a perfect reverse somersault by declaring that Trump had aided and abetted Moscow's attack on American democracy. 3 months later, Special Counsel Robert Mueller delivered his report, concluding that the investigation did not establish that members of the Trump campaign conspired or coordinated with the Russian government in its election interference activities. John Brennan, the instigator of the hoax. President Obama's CIA director, John Brennan, was instrumental in proliferating the dossier. But even before the Clinton campaign and Democrats funded Simpson and Steele's project to smear Trump with the collusion hoax, the seeds of the narrative were germinated by none other than Brennan. A close confidant of President Obama and a strident supporter of Clinton's candidacy, Brennan was determined to do what he could to place a bullseye on the back of her political rival. His reasons were both political and personal. If Clinton succeeded Obama, Brennan stood an excellent chance of maintaining the reins of power as the United States chief spook at the CIA. He had been close to President Bill Clinton, delivering daily intelligence briefings. He was a lifelong liberal who admitted that he had once voted for the Communist Party. Anyone like Trump who espoused conservative policies was viewed by Brennan as a villain. It is impossible to overestimate the immense power that resides in the hands of a CIA director. His actions are cloaked in stealth and secrecy. He hides behind legal protections afforded to clandestine operators who are supposed to be acting for the benefit of Americans and against foreign enemies that are dedicated to causing mischief and harm. Technically, he is subordinate to the Director of National Intelligence. During Brennan's tenure, the DNI was James Clapper. In reality, the CIA director operates quite independently and is answerable to no one except the president who appointed him or her. Sometimes even the president is kept in the dark. Against that enigmatic backdrop, Brennan's machinations in the collusion hoax are difficult to unspool. There is evidence that Brennan began formulating the Trump-Russia odyssey sometime in the latter part of 2015, long before the Clinton campaign and Democrats commissioned the dossier from Steele. According to the British publication The Guardian, Britain's spy agencies played a crucial role in alerting their counterparts in Washington to contacts between members of Donald Trump's campaign team and Russian intelligence operatives. Though this may sound ominous, the purported Russian contacts by associates of the campaign appear to have been either innocuous or non-existent. No evidence of an election conspiracy or coordination was picked up by what was described as routine surveillance of Russians. If that sketchy information was indeed flagged by foreign intelligence, Brennan would have been the natural recipient in the United States. The CIA is prohibited by law from monitoring or spying on its own citizens. Brennan certainly obtained information from somewhere, and the vaunted intelligence service of the United States' closest European ally seems logical. The CIA director boasted about how he had been the first to alert the FBI about collusion when he testified before the House Intelligence Committee in May 2017. I was aware of intelligence and information about contacts between Russian officials and U.S. persons that raised concerns in my mind about whether or not those individuals were cooperating with the Russians, either in a witting or unwitting fashion, and it served as the basis for the FBI investigation to determine whether such cooperation occurred. Brennan was just getting started. As he exerted uncommon pressure on the FBI to pursue a counterintelligence probe on Trump, he resolved to help spread the false allegations to Congress and the media. Simpson and Steele were already hounding reporters with their dossier when Brennan took a trip to Capitol Hill to tell top members of Congress of his information indicating that Russia was working to help elect Donald J. Trump president. Brennan argued that Trump was in on the conspiracy. He politicized phony intelligence and instigated the fraudulent case against Clinton's opponent. Among the House and Senate members whom Brennan briefed were the so-called Gang of Eight. These are the leaders of both parties, as well as the chairman and ranking members of the respective intelligence committees. Brennan held separate meetings with each of them, detailing the uncorroborated information on collusion that was based largely on the phony dossier. Although Brennan testified before lawmakers in May 2017 that he had been unaware of Steele's document and/or its contents until after the election, that was patently untrue. Brennan also denied under oath that the dossier had been a part of the intelligence review of Russian interference in the election and therefore could not have influenced the published report. That was also untrue, as evidenced by documents later uncovered. Lying to Congress is a crime. Brennan's next move was truly Machiavellian. Armed with the dossier itself, or at the very least its allegations, he briefed Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid, Democrat from Nevada, on August 25th. The plan was for Reid to send a letter to Comey demanding an investigation. The correspondence would be leaked to the media, giving journalists an excuse to publish stories about Trump-Russian collusion. Reid crafted the letter, which all but indicted Trump. 2 days later, on August 27th, Reid dispatched his correspondence to Comey accusing Trump of being an agent of Russia and the Kremlin in an effort to undermine our free and fair elections. The accusations were straight out of Steele's dossier, almost word for word. Trump was accused of participating in the hacking of Democratic emails, and a Trump advisor was accused of being bribed to effectuate future Trump policies toward Russia. It was all nonsense, but that didn't matter. Obviously, Brennan had delivered the contents of Steele's salacious document to Reid, and it was being put to destructive use. Naturally, Reid demanded an investigation, although he and Brennan certainly knew that one had already been officially opened. The letter and its allegations were all for show. The media needed a hook to justify running the story. Like Pavlov's dogs, journalists capitulated. The New York Times and the Washington Post reacted as predicted, publishing articles suggesting that Trump was a Russian asset. Other news organizations jumped on board and reported much the same. On August 29th, the Times connected Trump advisers to Russian leadership. In an August 30th column, Josh Rogin of the Post employed the word collusion in the lead sentence of his piece. That seems to have been the genesis of a term that was laden with criminal overtones and a descriptive pejorative that would become the fountainhead of the Russian hoax. Hillary Clinton seized on Reid's letter and publicly demanded that Trump be investigated. Her supporters cheered the fake news. It is difficult to know just how many millions of Americans accepted that propaganda, but it did not gain the result that Brennan and Reid desired. The Republican nominee did not sink in the polls. A second sub-Rosa attack would have to be engineered. It happened on October 30th, when Reid fired off another letter to Comey that repeated his accusation of explosive information about close ties and coordination between Donald Trump and the Russian government. As before, it was immediately leaked to the media, which were now working full-time to debilitate Trump's chances in the election that was just days away. The Washington Post, which had coined the invidious term collusion, repeated the word in a story the next day. So did other news outlets as they papered the nation with Reid's incendiary letter and fabricated accusations. From there, the word seemed to take on a life all its own. For the next 2 years and beyond, it would be misused and misunderstood in a deliberate effort to falsely accuse Trump of crimes he did not commit. The media, which never bothered to examine the legal meaning of collusion, embraced it as their cudgel to bludgeon Trump in the press and on the airwaves. As befitting common crooks who get caught and turn on each other, Brennan and Reid later gave conflicting accounts of what they'd done. Brennan claimed he had urged Reid not to send Comey his letters, while Reid claimed he had acted as Brennan wanted. Neither one of them has an ounce of credibility, so it's difficult to know which one is lying. Reid has a notable and remorseless history of spreading a lie to damage a Republican candidate for president. Brennan was trained in deception, duplicity, and chicanery. He has a long and distinguished record of dishonesty that has been well chronicled over the years. Input the words Brennan lies into any conventional search engine on the Internet and your computer will explode. Having repeatedly demonstrated that he cannot be trusted with classified or top-secret information, the former spook constituted a one-man national security risk. We expect CIA directors to be nonpartisan and apolitical. Brennan was not. We expect CIA directors to be circumspect, knowledgeable, and concerned about the reputation of their organization. Brennan was not. We expect CIA directors to be focused on genuine national security threats and getting to the bottom of things. Brennan was not. He misused classified information and disseminated false intelligence. Instead of collecting and analyzing intelligence to protect Americans from harm, Brennan misappropriated it to harm them, including Trump. He weaponized his powers for political reasons and personal gain. In August 2018, Trump announced that Brennan's security clearance would be revoked, but it never happened. It was too late. The CIA director had already wrought enormous damage. Maverick, John McCain, and David Kramer give the dossier Republican cred. Senator John McCain, Republican from Arizona, seemed to revel in his moniker Maverick. Like the lead character in the movie